Welcome everyone to Citizens Climate University tonight. Our topic is hosting a successful in-district event for your member of Congress. It's a webinar that's geared towards highlighting research that shows that members of Congress consider visits to local facilities to be one of the most valuable ways to understand constituent views and opinions more than any other source of information. This webinar is going to be geared towards showing you how to entice members of Congress to attend our local events and meet with key stakeholders. And to give the presentation tonight, we are very lucky to have Mr. Bradford Fitch. Brad Fitch is the president and CEO of Congressional Management Foundation. He's a former radio and television reporter and worked on Capitol Hill in 13 years as a press secretary, legislative director, and chief of staff. Then from 2001 to 2005, he served as deputy director of Congressional Management Foundation, and then left in 2006 to form a new company, entice, now part of CQ Roll Call, where Fitch served as vice president until 2010 when he returned as president of Congressional Management Foundation. Fitch is also the author of the Citizens Handbook to Influencing Elected Officials and Media Relations Handbook for Agencies, Associations, Nonprofits, and Congress. He's taught journalism and public communications at American University in Washington, D.C., where he served as an adjunct associate professor of communications. We are honored to have you tonight. Thank you so much for being on the line, Mr. Fitch, and we'll turn it over to you.
Well, thanks, Brett, and I appreciate the support of Citizens Climate Lobby. I've been working with you now for almost 3 years, I think, and am really moved by the passion and the interest of all the people who are involved in this very, very important nonprofit. It's been about a year or so since we've talked. I think we did some webinar work before, but we also have had the opportunity to do in-person presentations, and I'm looking forward to working with you on your upcoming event in Washington, D.C. So tonight, as Brett said, we're going to be talking about how to do events in the district or state, how to do meetings back home with members of Congress and their staffs. I can tell you, and the research is going to show this, this is one of the most important and valuable ways that citizens can interact with lawmakers and build relationships with lawmakers. And our research that we have done at the Congressional Management Foundation shows that that is the way to have influence over lawmakers. I should take one moment and explain a little bit about who the Congressional Management Foundation is and where this research is coming from. We're now in our 40th year. We were founded in 1977. Our primary purpose for the first 10 or 20 years was focused on Congress and helping them have better understanding of the management principles it takes to run these small businesses called Congress. So we're kind of like the small business consultant for Congress. And then as the internet came, we gained more of an interest in citizen engagement and how they interact with citizens, because it really did open up new doors and windows and avenues for members of Congress to interact with citizens, excuse me, in some ways that they couldn't quite figure out. And that's what our research is about, is to hopefully build better understanding and relationships and communications between citizens and Congress, because ultimately that's what our democracy is about, is making sure you have a voice and making sure that members of Congress listen to that voice. I know that some people believe that they don't listen to constituents, but I can tell you that all the research we've done, my 30 years of working with the U.S. Congress, shows that they do, if it's done well. If those interactions, if those meetings, if those presentations, if those events are done well. And that's a big part of what we're going to be talking about in tonight's webinar here. So first, I got to get some of the legal stuff out of the way. This content is the property of the Congressional Management Foundation. Any redistribution, publication, or broadcast without express written consent is strictly prohibited. The lawyers make me say that. Okay, what are we going to talk about in tonight's presentation? Well, first, why bother? Is this really something that works? Is having an event with a member of Congress, is having a meeting back home something that will really move the needle and get their attention? And is it sticky? Will it be something that they remember? We'll talk about and walk through the process from making the ask and coordinating with a member office. Now, I'm talking about, and some of the research I'm showing is talking about the United States Congress, but I am very certain in talking with local officials that if you're talking about a state legislator, if you're talking about a city council member or a mayor, pretty much the same process goes on there. There may be fewer people involved. In fact, there are fewer people involved unless it's a big city mayor. But the processes, the principles, the strategies are Very similar. And finally, we provided to you in advance the comprehensive planning checklist. That was something that was sent out by Brett for the sort of pre-event procedures. If you do need that checklist, we will provide it to you. And we say comprehensive, we mean that. There's no way you're going to do everything on this checklist. It's not meant for it to be a checklist for every event. It's if you're doing the biggest event with the most people, with media coverage and all that comes with it, yeah, this would be a helpful checklist. But even if you're doing a smaller event, there are going to be tips here. There's going to be check boxes like, oh, I didn't think about what the photo op would look like. And so we have you think about that in this planning checklist that is developed. Well, why do this? Why bother? Well, in part, it's to sort of reaffirm that phrase that came from Tip O'Neill, all politics is local. That's not just a cliche anymore. That is absolutely true. For those political scientists in the room who took poli-sci, you might have read a book by Richard Fenno called Homestyle. I know I'm getting a little wonky here. I actually just read it a couple years ago again to see how relevant it was. It was written in 1972, and this political scientist spent 8 weeks going with members of Congress back home, traveling with them, and it really does live up to that phrase, all politics is local. To give you a little more modern reference, let's go to some of the research the Congressional Management Foundation has conducted with congressional staff. So because of our closeness with the U.S. Congress, we are able to get some really good survey data back from members of Congress and staff. And in a recent survey we took of senior congressional staff, we asked this question right here. In your opinion, how important are the following for understanding constituents' views and opinions? And as you can see right at the top of the list is attending events in the district or state. I would also point out at 90% is in-person town hall meetings. And I'll talk a little bit about town hall meetings later in the program because they've definitely had some ups and downs, pros and cons in the last 12 months. So we'll talk a little bit about some of the unpublished research the Congressional Management Foundation has done on town hall meetings. But as you look at this chart, clearly you're seeing congressional staff are reporting that doing these types of events are really important, whether it's like touring a downtown business or visiting a factory. I noticed after I set this up that this shows a picture of Eric Cantor, who got voted out of office, and I'm guessing that he didn't do a lot of these events because if he did more of them, he'd probably still be in Congress instead of spending time in Washington. Anyway, this is a more common event where a member of Congress goes to a facility, meets with constituents, sees a complicated piece of machinery and smiles at it, and actually then becomes a champion for that particular cause. That's what you're looking for. You want to get that event that attracts the member of Congress. And I'll put this in a personal sense. I mean, Brett told you I worked on the Hill, but let me go into a little more detail of my bio. Most of my years, my 13 years, I was doing press relations for members of the House and Senate. 11 of my 13 years, I was sometimes the legislative director, and then my last 2 years, I was the chief of staff. But that meant I was involved in the district scheduling activities for the member of Congress. And usually the process worked pretty much like clockwork. We're about 5 to 6 weeks out of an upcoming congressional recess. We would get together, and it would be myself, the district director, and maybe the chief of staff, maybe the scheduler, and we'd look and think about where we wanted to go. Now, at this point, I just want to point out, we're not looking at invitations at this point. We're just thinking about what message we want to convey. And then once we decide that, okay, we want to send the Congressman Rahal to a hospital, and we want him to go to the NICU unit, and we want definitely one of the nurses there because nurses are very popular, and we know we have to have the CEO there, so that's why we got another guy in a tie there. We thought about it in those terms, and then we planned backwards and thought about, okay, what other events could we do, and how does that fit in? The point I'm making here is the person who was not involved in the process was the member of Congress, the representative or senator. They're not involved in the scheduling process. Now, if you have a relationship with a rep or a senator, that's great. They can weigh in and they'll definitely say, I want to go do that. And 98% of the time, the staff is going to do what they want them to do when it's convenient to do that. But for most of the scheduling, it's done by staff. And so that's why you have to think about the process that they go through and put yourself in their shoes. think how they think, and you're much more likely to get a legislator to come do an event with you, or even have an in-district meeting at their office or at some other facility that you have available to you. So what I'm going to do now, I'm going to walk through the various steps in the process to give you a feeling of the step-by-step process. The first thing you want to do is create an idea. What are the goals of the event? Think about the photo. As I said to you earlier, that's what the staff is thinking about. They're thinking about what it'll look like. You guys got some pretty good photo ops, especially on the West Coast. You're talking about the environment. That means they're outside. You don't need lights. I mean, what you're talking about is you're not looking at a photo with a guy in a tie in front of a podium. I was press secretary for 11 years. I assure you, I had a wide variety of choices of pictures of my bosses in front of podiums wearing a tie. I don't need any more of those. I want them outside. I want them talking to people in white coats. I want them wearing a flak jacket. That's really good. Hairnets, not so much. But the whole idea is you want them in an outdoor setting interacting with constituents. And then work backwards from there. How do you create that setting and really paint that picture for the staff member who's going to make a decision? So speaking of a picture, let's look back at this picture we used as an example. I mean, the focus here is really good. This is a great kind of average looking photo. It's not professionally done. You got a member of Congress focusing on what probably is a little baby inside of an incubator unit. You got who's featured in the organization. Well, here's a woman in a white coat holding onto a button. That's really good. She's probably a nurse. If I'm a member of Congress, that's awesome. Why? Nurses have the highest approval rating of any profession in the United States of America. I'm not kidding. Way higher than teachers, even the clergy. So this is a really good photo op. Unfortunately, also, there's this guy in a tie. Again, I do not need guys in ties in my photo. He snuck in, you know, because he's the CEO and he's got to sneak into all the photos. So but the point is that this is what you're looking for, is you're thinking about that event. You're thinking about what that photo is going to look like. And equally important, ask yourself, how does the event promote or advance the legislator's goals? Now, the legislator's goals, if you're dealing with a Republican who's opposed to climate change, might be, do you want to show you have an open mind? Do you want to show you listen to your constituents? Do you want to show that you're tough enough to actually go into the so-called lion's den and interact with us? And that may be the goal that the legislator's trying to prove. If it's a Democrat, it might be they want to show a connection to your issue in a very local way. So keep in mind, that's the prism by which staff will assess the value of having the member of Congress meet with you or come to your event. Next, identify the process within the office. Every congressional office has a process by which they review scheduling requests. It might be a form that you download from their website. It might be a form that's on their website that's an interactive form. They may want you to fax on letterhead or a letter to a particular fax number. Yes, believe it or not, some on Capitol Hill still use that old-fashioned thing called faxes. Why do they do that? They like to see letterhead. They like to know that you're affiliated with an organization that has some people or some heft associated with it. Or they may send you to a voicemail of the scheduler in the Washington or district or state office, and the scheduler will then talk to you in a recording for 2 to 3 minutes about what the process is. It may be sending an email to scheduler@mdo4.mail.house.gov. So it's about 4 or 5 different processes that offices use. Find out what it is. I assure you, if you need to find out, you literally pick up the phone, you call the district office, and unless it's an intern on their first day, and you ask, I want to send an invitation to the member of Congress for a meeting or event. How do I do it? I guarantee you 99% of the persons answering that phone will know. It's one of the first things they're trained to do, will know what to do, where to send you to a link to a website, to a voicemail, or even just an email address. And they'll have instructions literally written out for them. Also, keep in mind, as part of the process, the congressional calendar. The congressional calendar had some significant changes in 2011 when the Republicans took over, and Boehner and Cantor did something really unusual. They actually polled members of the House of Representatives, and they said, what do you like and dislike about the running of the institution? And by the way, whether you're a Democrat or Republican, we at the Congressional Management Foundation applaud it. Here's managers that actually ask their stakeholders what the hell they liked and disliked about their jobs. And the number one answer they got back is we don't like the uncertainty in the schedule. And I definitely can echo that. I worked on the Hill from 1988 to 2001, and you never knew if you were going to have votes Friday. You never knew after you came in Tuesday, you had votes at 2, but then what happened Thursday or Friday? Well, the Republicans changed that, and I think it'll never change back in the House because everybody loves it. They have 12 or 13 recesses a year. They know exactly what the calendar is going to be on Fridays. They have mini recesses. It's not that they're voting less or they're actually working less. There's just more certainty in the calendar. So this is just showing you like the first half of 2018. And you can see we've got a recess coming up next week. The recesses are in white, the in-session are in blue. We've got a recess in February over President's Week. We then have another one 4 weeks later. The other thing they did is by doing these recesses every 4 weeks, there was this killer period for a congressional staffer from President's Day to Easter, where you're in session like 12 or 15 weeks. Oh my gosh, we were so burnt out. But now you're not. You got these breaks. So take a look at the congressional calendar. It's very easy to access. You Google House calendar and you'll get it for 2018. It's a downloadable PDF. If you have Outlook, you can even integrate it into your Outlook calendar. I mean, it's really amazing how they've done. Senate hasn't gone that far yet, but that's just because it's the Senate and they're behind in technology and almost everything, but don't tell anybody I said that. Anyway, the point is that you can look at what's coming up, and we'll talk a little bit about how far in advance to make your request a little later in the program, but you do want to know when that period of time is. And also, when you make your request, don't be specific if you can avoid it. For example, if you say, well, can you come to an event on, January 29th at 5 p.m., and their answer is going to be no, we're in session and the State of the Union is tomorrow. So they can't do that. But if you say to them, I understand you have 5 weeks of recess in August. Can you do an event sometime during those 5 weeks? They'll, in kind of a hard spot, not to say yes. If you ask 2 or 3 times and they say no every time, well, you got a pretty good idea of where you stand with that congressional office. But what we want you to do is think flexibly, but always know what the calendar is. Third, in your chapter, identify the process within your chapter. We use the word organization, but we know that Citizens Climate Lobby has chapters. I know because my wife signed up for ours in Fairfax, Virginia, so I got the information, I got the call, so we kind of know a little bit about how you work on the inside. And so, identify what you want to do within your chapter, how you want to do it in terms of how the process will work. Do your homework on the legislator. What comments have they made on your issue on climate change? Have they given speeches? What have been the things they've said in interviews? This really distinguishes sophisticated grassroots advocates with average grassroots advocates. If you actually know in advance, if you're going to ask that question and know in advance what they're going to say, or that they might or might not have a connection to your issue, that's going to help you in every aspect of the event or meeting about how you make the ask, what you put into the ask, how you phrase it. You may start your ask with, I understand, excuse me, that the senator has made some tough statements on climate change. Do you think he might be open to the idea of hearing other ideas or other views? By the way, listen to how I said that. Are you open to the idea? I love phrasing questions that way in Washington, D.C., because it's really hard for them to say, no, I'm a closed-minded individual. I'm not even open to the idea of listening to someone else. And so that's why it's really important that people say it that way and really think about what that legislator is. But members of Congress really do feel an ethical and moral obligation to the next generation. And I don't care if they're conservative, liberal, Democrat, Republican, every member I've worked with, they look at the next generation and they see it as their responsibility to be a good steward, to talk to them, to train them, to listen to them. And I'll never forget, and this is a little off topic, but I was talking to a member of Congress and doing research for my book, Citizens Handbook. And I asked him, what's a difficult issue you've had to decide? And he said, I was really tough in trying to decide what to do on the issue of fetal cell research and whether or not we should support it with federal funding. And he said he was torn, and then he said there was a 17-year-old boy who came in from my district, and he emphasized he was only 17 years old, and he was so articulate in talking about that issue. I decided I needed to research more because he said to me, Congressman, It's my hope that this research someday might lead to a cure to me and others like me. And the member leaned into me and he said, that meeting just stuck with me. And he ended up researching his position, and he changed his position from no to a yes and co-sponsored legislation for federal funding for stem cell research. And that lawmaker was a pro-life Republican. So yeah, young people can really get the attention of lawmakers. And so if you do have those college students or high school students and you're in the delegation, I will say that sometimes if you trot out the 6-year-old and say, they're, against logging in Oregon, they're going to think mom and dad put them up to it. But high school students and college students and right out of college, really, really powerful advocates. So thanks for that question. The next step, what you want to do is draft the ask. So you want to actually put this in writing. This is a really important document and a piece of paper. I would have to say this is where 50% of the requests for meetings and events get thrown out or get rejected or ignored because they just don't have the right details. So what are you looking for? Well, there's some magic words to include in your ask. Include clear logistics. Now we say who, what, when, where. We're not saying clear as in, as I said, pick the date, don't, but they do want to know who will be involved. Sorry, if you just heard a dog barking, that was my dog, sorry about that. You want to know who is going to be involved. That is absolutely essential. They will not go to an event if they don't know who is attending. Even if you just say some representatives from Citizens Climate Lobby, they'll say, give me their names. They will not go to an event. They will not, if they do not know the names of the people who will be there. It's really as basic as that. As I say, be specific. I've talked throughout this to paint a picture. It's always a great idea. What are you going to do? Are you going to walk it through? Are we going to do a tour of something? We'll be walking. We'll be sitting at a table. We'll be inside, outside. You get the idea. Include clear contact information. Sometimes 2 people is a really good idea with both their emails and cell phone numbers. If you can talk about the impact in the district or state, that's really valuable. And finally, this is probably the best trick I've come up with, is utilize multiple communications through various avenues. One of the things that's interesting about nonprofit organizations, which is different than associations and companies, is your supporters and members may have affiliations with other industries or people or organizations in the district. So let's say you've got somebody who's a CCL member in Geneva, New York, in upstate New York. And you've got another one down the road in Waterloo. And the one in Geneva happens to be a school teacher. And the one in Waterloo happens to be a nurse. Well, if they both send in their communication at the same time for a visit to Congressman Tom Reed to come take a look at the impact of climate change on Seneca Lake, and I'm using these examples because that's my hometown and where I'm from, then that's going to catch that office's attention. If you send them in a very limited time period, like around the same time period, this is what is going to happen. I guarantee you. The scheduler will print them up, staple them together, and include them with a packet in the file for the chief of staff or the district director to review. So that's why having multiple people come in. The other reason is valuable is members of Congress like to say yes once and make many people happy. So if they say, oh, I can make a teacher and a nurse happy if I say yes to going to Seneca Lake and go looking, then I'm going to think about it. So this is a really important set of rules here to think about as you put in your request for a member of Congress to do an event or a meeting. Follow up on the ask. You can be persistent. You have no idea how many communications are coming into congressional office. There are literally thousands of communications. They set up good filters to try to make sure that only constituents are putting them in, but they're not perfect. And so you may, if they don't follow up with you, if they don't get back to you, if you do think you've done everything right, it's not because they're ignoring you most of the time. It's because somehow it's fallen through the cracks. They change schedulers. They have a lousy scheduler. Yep, that happens sometimes, not often. Be a little patient, but not too patient. And I'll talk about timing in a second. And as I've noted a couple of times, be flexible on your timing. That's really key. You don't have to be flexible on location. You don't have to be too flexible on people. It's really weird for an office to go back to a citizen group and say, I don't want so-and-so there, because they're terrified that would get in the local paper. So they really don't reject people. I mean, my 13 years on Capitol Hill, I think I can't even think of an example. We were times we were a little nervous about it. We're going to an event and we'll say, oh, that person's really said a lot of nasty things about the boss, and the boss will be uncomfortable there. But, they're politicians, they'll be good over it, and that's come up a couple of times. And also remember, persistence can grind an iron beam down into a needle. We don't want you to be doing a lot of grinding here, but we do want you to, think about, when and how often you follow up. Now, with that in mind, I have a little more data to show you. One of the more interesting surveys the Congressional Management Foundation has done in the last few years was of schedulers, House schedulers. And we got a phenomenal response rate, and we really wondered why. And someone ran into one of the schedulers in a bar on Capitol Hill, and they said, it's because no one ever asked us our opinion. And we're really glad somebody finally cared about what we thought about. And one of the key questions we asked was this one right here. Generally, how quickly does your office take to respond to a request for a meeting with the member? So again, we're looking for turnaround time. How quickly does your office take to respond to a meeting, for a request for a meeting with the member? And as you can see here, what we found is once you get past 2 weeks, they pretty much have responded. So this message to you is, if you're in week 4 and you haven't heard back from the member of Congress, it's okay to follow up. And here's the best way to follow up. You call the district office and you ask this question, something like this. I sent in a request for a meeting with the member of Congress. I think I did it right. Maybe I didn't. Maybe I left some important data out. Can I give you my name and information, and can you check and see what happened to the request? Now, they might do a couple of things. They might say, sure, let me take your information. They might say, oh, would you just resend an email to scheduler@mdo4mail.house.gov? They give you a couple other ways to do it. But I will tell you that in every congressional office I worked in, if you ever had that come in and you had that second request come in, woe be the staff assistant that does not pass that on to the chief of staff. Because now you're looking at real trouble. Now you're looking at, if you don't respond, a letter to the editor from that constituent saying, I sent 2 letters requesting a meeting with 30 constituents to talk about climate change. I didn't hear anything back. Clearly, the congressman doesn't care about climate and whether we all die. The point is that after 2 weeks, it may be just an administrative error that's going on here. So it's really good to follow up. I wouldn't use the same method. If you went through the form, if you went through sending in a fax or something, make a phone call. Calling the district office is usually a little better idea. They may end up sending you to Washington, but calling the district office when a response hasn't come in is usually your best bet. So your next step you want to go to is you want to think about the details and settle them in concert. Now, if they've decided, yes, we're going to do it, okay, now you're moving to another level of scheduling. Now you're actually going in and you're beyond getting past the ask. You're now figuring out the where, exactly the exact when, and the scheduler is going to want to know more details, and we'll talk about those in a second. One district scheduler said, focus on the big picture, but never forget the tiny details. And as I said earlier, I become wary of groups who don't specify how many people will attend a meeting. They are beyond wary. They won't let the member go there, because if they do, they get in trouble. So start thinking about the details. Now, the details, if you've got a member of the House or Senate, is you may have other luminaries or dignitaries or other muckety-mucks that you have to keep in mind that are there. A visit from a member of Congress is a big deal. Now, keep in mind, if the muckety-muck is a local muckety-muck, like somebody who's like a small-town mayor, members of Congress like that. If it's another member of Congress, they do not. They want to be the big man and big girl on campus when they go to an event. And I can tell you the number of times I heard back from my boss, they'd come back from an event when they'd say, did you know there were 3 mayors, a senator, and another House member there, and I barely got 2 minutes on the dais. So keep in mind that you want to keep it to a limited number of muckety-mucks, but not too many. Also, identify a process within your chapter of who's responsible for the event. It's always good if one person owns success or failure, if you have one project manager. Now, many of you in your daytime jobs may be project managers, may do it on a regular basis, may work in teams, but maybe you don't. It's good to have somebody who has a little experience with event management. They don't have to do like member of Congress event management. They just have to have general understanding of the basic principles of a project and delegation and things like that. Someone may have a connection or skill sets for the event. And if they have a problem, can they get additional resources? Can they look to somebody else? Do they have other people helping out? Especially in volunteer organizations like Citizens Climate Lobby, it's really a good idea to delegate a little authority, not a lot of authority. You know, we don't want 20 people involved in this. That's really bad. I'm a huge believer and fan of what I call the subcommittee of 2. I think 2 people on a subcommittee is really the ideal number. Now, in an event, you may want 3 or 4 eventually involved. But in terms of decision-making and authority, I really like the number 2. You got a second brain. They don't feel like it's all on their shoulders. Something may come up in the first person's life. A kid gets sick, or, you know, they have to go, they get the flu or something like that. So keep in mind that you want to make sure responsibility is designated appropriately. And assign deadlines. If you know you're going to have an event in 8 weeks, with a member of Congress, you know, make sure that on week 2, this is done. On week 4, this is done. Make sure you have a good, clear idea of what you're going to do and who's going to do it. One of my favorite quotes when it comes to deadlines came from Diana Hunt, who said, "Goals are dreams with deadlines." If you get an event request from 2 characters that you would not expect to be connected to one another, then it really gets the attention of members of Congress. I mean, just think about this. If you saw, you know, this is always very famous in the Senate. You know, when we saw a piece of legislation that was co-sponsored by Orrin Hatch, a Republican from Utah, and Ted Kennedy, a liberal from Massachusetts, we stopped. We paused. Whoa, what's this? You know, this gets our attention. If Hatch and Kennedy are both on it, why aren't we? So that's the type of thing. If you can tell me that an environmental group and the Chamber of Commerce want to do an event and talk about event, whoa, what's going on? They're often battling each other. You know, if they can get together on a topic, that is really, really, really going to get the connection. I don't know if some of you followed the some of the work that was being done when the Trump administration last week opened up offshore oil drilling. But there was really interesting coalitions coming together in Florida and other states. So with that, I'm going to very quickly go over the comprehensive planning checklist. And the reason I'm going to go quickly over is because Brett has a copy of this document. And if you did not get a copy of this document in advance, please feel free to ask him, and he'll send you a copy.
It's in the chat window as well.
And it's in the chat window as well. Thank you, Brett. So you can download it at this time. And again, as I pointed out, we designed this with the word comprehensive in mind, that you don't need to do all of these things because you're not perhaps going to have a professional photographer. But someone should take pictures. You know, iPhones are really great. In fact, increasingly, research on social psychology is teaching us, because of sort of the iPhone generation, that authentic photographs taken on smartphones are increasingly more popular and more shared than professional photographs. So I am fascinated by that. We try to study social science at CMF and behavioral science, and it's really fascinating. So not having a professional photographer, unless you're going to get it framed and send out signed copies, everybody's there. But you do want to be thinking about other materials that might be needed at a particular event. And if it's inside of a conference room, or if you're doing like a town hall meeting, do you need a microphone? You know, what's the crowd side? When we did town hall meetings, that was a really big issue. Number 11 is always important, I would say, even if you're doing a smaller event, the body man, the body woman, who's going to escort the legislator into the building or around. There should be one person that should be the liaison to their counterpart for the member of Congress. Every member of Congress is going to come with a staffer. It might be a 23-year-old kid right out of college. I'm sorry, person right out of college. You know, that is, you know, just making sure that they have what they need. They have water. They have their schedule. They know who they're talking to. They whisper in the ear saying, "Oh, you know, you met this person a year ago." You know, but they're always going to have somebody, and they want to know that you have somebody like that can just take care of any detail that may be overlooked or any change that happens. Let's say the legislators is late or something like that, which is frequently the case. We talk about in this document the run of show, meaning what's the tick-tock, sometimes called, of the event, from 00 to 30 minutes to 60 minutes. Most members of Congress, when they do an event or meeting in the district or state, will do a minimum of 30 minutes. It's very rare for an event to be less than 30 minutes, unless They are an incredibly busy United States senator. And even senators, I mean, from Texas and California and New York, I don't think they do 15-minute intervals in Washington. They might do it in their offices, but that's really rare. And it's because the members can't handle it. I mean, how would you like to have 13 meetings a day, 5 days a week? It sucks. It's just not a very normal way to live. And so when they get back in the district or state, they want to take a little more easy, and they want to have a little more time to understand the issue. I was talking to a group of farmers. I was doing a speech to a bunch of farmers and talking about this topic of events in the district or state. And one of them came up to me and said, you know, I had a really interesting thing happen to me. We just happened to be represented by a member of the agricultural subcommittee, which has jurisdiction over my crop. And it's really prominent in our district. And we were able to get a member of Congress to agree to come visit. And I told them, I'd like to get a few of my friends to come and talk with you at the same time. And they said, oh, sure, that's great. Well, they got 40 farmers out to this corn farm in Kansas, I think it was, on a Saturday afternoon at 1 o'clock. The member of Congress was scheduled to stay there for 30 minutes. He stayed there for 4 hours. He basically turned to his staff and said, blow up the rest of my schedule. I want to talk to these guys for the rest of these men and women for the rest of the afternoon. And so, yeah, I mean, think about, you know, how they spend their time with you is going to be something else they think about. These days, think about the media and the press, both positive and negative. You know, you may or may not have a sympathetic reporter that you want there. Sometimes you do, sometimes you don't. So keep that in mind. And think in advance of some of the things you may need to do to make the event look a little more professional. If you're doing it inside, think about the photo op backdrop. You know, I would also say if you're doing it at a public event, don't forget security. Most member offices will ask you about security. If it's some kind of town hall meeting, they'll ask about that. Generally, the Congressional Management Foundation advises members of Congress to alert local police if they're going to be in a public setting because of the number of death threats that they've been getting, especially this year, especially because of the shooting at the baseball diamond. And I was around working at the Congressional Management Foundation when Gabby Giffords was shot. I was at a town hall meeting when policemen showed up, and I wondered what they were doing there. I was a staff member for my member and said, what are you guys doing here? And they said, we've had a death threat against your member of Congress, and we're here to protect him. So that security is something that you never want to lose too much sight of. And finally, think about follow-up before the event. One thing we didn't put here, we forgot to add this to the list, is think about social media, both before and after. As you think about social media, what are those tweets and Facebook posts and Instagrams you're going to be putting after the event, because that's something that they're going to be looking at, because they want to know that they're going to get some coverage and they're going to retweet it themselves. You know, I picked on hairnets a little earlier, but this is actually a pretty cool picture. This is a member of Congress at a gumball factory, which I think is a really cool photo op. And this is better though. This is what you really want. You want a member of Congress not wearing a tie. I mean, there's a pickup truck, you know, this guy on the right hasn't shaved since, you know, 1972. I mean, this is what you want. It's just, you want something like this and thinking about those follow-ups. And one of the best follow-up things that you can do for an event is write a letter to the editor. I worked for 13 years on Capitol Hill. I never got a hotline with my boss's name on it and the words "thank you" in it. So this is really a good thing to do. And even if you're not going to get a letter to the editor, let's say you're in a metropolitan area, draft it, send it, and then send a copy to the district director who coordinated you on the event. Because two things will happen. You'll be communicating two things to that office. I have a megaphone and I know how to use it. And so that's why the letter to the editor was one of the most underutilized tool in a citizen advocate's toolkit. So I strongly urge you to consider that.
At this point, I think we're set. We've just gotten many, many thank yous, both private and in the chat window, for your time tonight, Mr. Fitch. Thank you so much, Bradford, for making it on the call and giving us this invaluable advice. And we look forward to taking it to heart and having a lot of successful meetings.
Well, and I wish you all good luck with your advocacy efforts. And that was how we originally came together in 2011, and we've just been very fortunate to be able to participate with CCL and help you with the great work you're doing. So keep it up. It's needed now more than ever, and I look forward to future opportunities to work with your very devoted advocates.